And then he looked at me and he was like, dude, I'm 99% sure you have type 1 diabetes. And I was like, yes. Oof. So I get questions about being a type 1 diabetic all the time. And I love it, actually. I'm glad that people are curious, and I'm glad that I get to spread some positive awareness and good information. And speaking of, if you ever have questions about my experience with type 1 or anything else, please drop them in the comments. I love answering them, and I think one of the best ways to get answers is to ask questions. So with all those questions I get about type 1, a lot of them are centered around my diagnosis, which I find really interesting. But because I love a good story, and I'm sure that some of you diabetics might have a story similar to mine, I wanted to share the fascinating story of how I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 21. It's like, yay, 21, you can drink, and here's diabetes, which is, I don't even drink, so I feel like kind of a letdown on multiple fronts. But anyway, so this story starts a long time ago. Whoa, not that long. Yeah, right there. Here I am, age 21. I'd just gotten back from living abroad in Taiwan, and now I was back in the United States and at college. The only problem was, as I was living abroad, I had lost 50 pounds, which I'm already a pretty skinny guy, so I was looking like a little too lean to where it's like you're sick. Anyway, so I knew I needed to put on some weight. And bear with me, it is actually because of my weight that I found out I was diabetic. Why? Well, freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was the same 160-pound stick bug that I was when I came back from living abroad. But then I found out what food and exercise were, and bulked up to start looking like a normal human. Before I left to live abroad in Taiwan, I was like 210, 215 pounds. And when I came back, I was 160. So I knew that I'd bulked up from 160 to 210, 215 before. So I figured, why not just do it again? And that's exactly what I did. I pretty much employed the same program that I did before. I had a workout regimen, good diet, and I figured, let's do this thing. So I started going to the gym and eating a clean but calorically dense diet. And sure enough, nothing happened. And I was like, okay, this is weird. I should be gaining weight. And maybe my metabolism's changed in my old age at 20 or 21. Yeah. Anyway, I couldn't figure it out. So I figured, why not just up the calories, eat a little bit more food. So that's what I did. I kept the workouts the same and ate more food. And lo and behold, nothing happened. And at this point, it had been maybe like 2, 3, 4 months. And I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I just need more calories than I can get with all this clean food. So I figured, let's get rid of the broccoli, rice, chicken meals, and let's go straight to the good stuff. Or what I like to call the seafood diet, where you see food and you eat it. Now, I do not recommend the seafood diet to anyone because it was not a healthy point in my life. I was eating on a daily average like 6,000 to 7,000 calories, most of which was comprised of using Pop-Tarts as cereal or eating Chipotle burritos like they were chicken nuggets. It was an obscene amount of food. And the crazy thing is, I was doing this, working out, and I was losing weight, which is crazy to me. And I was like, this makes no sense. And it was around this point where I started seeing some other signs that something was off. And it's interesting because there are a few like normal signs associated with type 1 diabetics. You'll hear about like frequent urination, excessive thirst. I didn't really pay attention to either of those. Right before, or right around this time, I saw a lot of like brain fog. I would be in class trying so hard to pay attention, so hard to focus, and I just couldn't think. It was like someone was storm clouding my brain. It was the worst. And then I also noticed as I was sitting in the back of the class, I would look up at the whiteboard and my eyes would hurt because they were being strained. And I was like, I've never had eye problems before. But the one that really scared me, this last kind of symptom, was as I was working out on some of my heavy lifts, I started like blacking out. And I've never had this happen before. And so I remember it happening a few times. And then on one specific lift, I remember unracking the weight. And then I don't remember what happened after. But when I came to, I was sitting down on a bench and was like 10 feet away from the weight. And I was like, okay, something is off. And the frustrating thing was I knew that something was off, but I didn't know what it was. Like I couldn't pinpoint it. And so I'm not normally one to go to doctors, but I figured I needed some medical attention. So I signed up to do some blood work and then scheduled myself a doctor's appointment. Okay, so this is where the story gets really good. I had my doctor's appointment March 17th of 2019. I just went to see a general doctor, sitting in the room waiting for him, classic doctor's office visit, you know. And after a while, the doctor opens the door, like peeks in, has clipboard in hand, and he looks at me in like a really weird kind of like surprised way. And he was like, "You Brian?" And I was like, "Yeah." And straight up, he looked at me and then said out loud, "That can't be right," and then walked out. Those are words you never want to hear from your doctor. And I was totally caught off guard. I was like, what? So I'm sitting there and it felt like 10 minutes went by. And finally he comes back in again. And he's like, "Dude, I don't know how to tell you this, but you have the blood of like a 400-pound, 40-year-old man." And at this point, I was like, this guy has the bedside manner of a walrus. Like, what are we doing here? But I literally had no idea what he was talking about. And so I asked, I was like, "What do you mean?" So he explained himself a little bit in how he figured my blood was like an obese man's. And then he looked at me and he was like, "Dude, I'm 99% sure you have type 1 diabetes." And I was like, yes! No joke. That was my reaction. I want to point out, I wasn't emphatic about saying yes because I was stoked to have a chronic illness. I was just so happy that I knew what was wrong. Like I knew something was wrong for all this time and I couldn't figure it out. And so to have someone tell me like, "Hey, here's the thing." It was like I wasn't blindly fighting for my health anymore. And I'd heard, like I knew what type 1 diabetes was. I really didn't. But I'd heard about it and I knew people who were type 1s. And so I was like, okay, like I know they're alive. I know you can manage it. And so I was very excited about the fact that I now had a diagnosis. Like I now had something to, I don't want to say fight, but something to treat, something to manage. So after I kind of explained my excitement to these doctors, they handed me a copy of my blood work to walk me through it, and it is a doozy. I actually kept my copy from 5 years ago. Maybe I'll like frame it or something just for good time's sake. But anyway, I wanted to show you how crazy this is. Anyway, you can see the date here, March 27th, 2019. And then obviously the big ticket item we're looking for here is glucose. So right down here, glucose 678. 678. That's insane. And I love how there's a verified by repeat analysis. As in, that's like doctor jargon for holy shoot, we need to check this again because something's not right. But just crazy. And obviously, with that high glucose, I know some of you are probably curious what my A1C was. And so here it is. It is a 10.8. How crazy, like 10.8. And again, at the time of my diagnosis, I didn't know what these numbers meant. Like, I didn't know. They told me, they're like, yeah, normal blood sugar range for blood work, we're looking at like 70 to 100. So to be at 678, I was like, okay, clearly that's off the rails. But I didn't know how serious that number and then my A1C were when I was diagnosed. Like, I look back at them now, and it's terrifying because those are high numbers. And as the doctors were explaining all the health risks and problems that can come from prolonged blood sugar and elevated A1C levels, I had this horrific realization that just a few days before this doctor's appointment, I had eaten dinner and then gone to hang out with a bunch of friends, and they hadn't eaten. So we all went and grabbed some Mexican food. I grabbed 2 of these massive burritos that were stuffed with steak and French fries. I know, French fries on a burrito. I don't know what I was doing. I was in college. But I downed both of these, and then we went to Crumble, like the cookie place, and I ate 4 whole Crumble cookies. And I was still hungry. Like, I have never been hungrier in my life, but I was downing all this food. And so I was thinking about it, and I was like, okay, if my fasting blood sugar is at a 678, that meal just a few days before, I will never know, but I could almost guarantee you that I was in the thousands, which is terrifying. And I think about it now, and I'm just so lucky and so blessed that I didn't end up in like a coma from my blood sugar, which unfortunately I know so many type 1 diabetics have that as their diagnosis story. Like, they have no idea what's going on, but then they go into DKA or a diabetic coma from extreme blood sugars, and that's how they find out they're diagnosed. And that should have been me, with numbers like that, which is terrifying. And so I totally feel for everybody who has been diagnosed with type 1, and I recognize how blessed I am that I didn't end up in the hospital or worse, because those numbers and how I was taking care of myself, it's just crazy. So the doctors have shown me my blood work and recommended some people to see and treatments and more blood work and more appointments. I felt like I lived in the hospital for like the next 2 months. But I've kind of painted this picture, and so I wanted to go off the cuff for a sec and just talk about the feelings that I had with that diagnosis, because obviously my initial knee-jerk reaction was excitement because I knew what I was treating now. I knew what was wrong with me. But very quickly, as I was listening to the information about type 1 and how this would change things, I was 100% scared. And I think it would be hard not to be with a life-changing diagnosis. I mean, you think every day of the things you do and how you have your life planned, and then in one day to have that completely shifted to, am I even capable of doing the same things that I once was or wanted to do is terrifying. And I remember feeling really discouraged and scared and frightened at what the future would be. I, knowing my personality, I wasn't super worried about managing type 1. I know I can be adamant about routine, and so as they were explaining like the need for insulin and getting on a routine, like I was like, okay, I'm confident I can do that, and I know that's not everybody, and that's probably a very scary part of diabetes for a lot of people, is that rigidity. But in my experience, I was more worried about how type 1 would affect the life that I wanted to have. And one of the first questions I asked the doctor was, will my kids have it? Because I've always wanted to be a father, and that scared me more than anything. Anyway, they were very good about being honest with information and saying that there's obviously a chance. But I was just really worried about my life. I was kind of being selfish and looking inward and like, oh gosh, how does this affect me? And another thing I remember is the first time I went and picked up insulin. They gave me a prescription and I went and picked it up. And I remember my endocrinologist had talked me through it, but it was pretty nonchalant. It was like, yeah, you're going to put a needle cap on this pen, turn the dial, and we're going to try out this many units, and then you'll just give yourself a shot, and that's it. And I remember I had been fire hosed with so much information that she said this, and I remember it, but there was so much that I should have asked a lot more questions than I did, because I got home that night, picked up my prescription, and I remember in my dorm, I had the needle and the insulin pen on my bed, and I sat there for like 25 minutes, and I was like, I don't know if I can give myself a shot. Like, I was so scared because I'd never given myself a shot before. That's not a normal thing to do. And the endocrinologist just said it so nonchalantly that I was like, oh my gosh, like, what if I mess it up? Like, what if I stab myself in the wrong place and take out an artery and turn into the Hulk? Like, I was terrified of this one needle. And I remember that was such a pivotal moment for me in my type 1 journey, because I was like, okay, I can do this. And I grabbed the needle, put it on the pen, dialed. I think I started like 8 units or something, and gave myself a shot. Oh, and I remember it hurt so bad. I don't remember if it was just mental or physical, and maybe I didn't have the needle in all the way, or I probably had the wrong size needle. But I was like, this is my life now. Just shots. And it was crazy. But I remember that, and then checking my blood sugar, having to prick my finger all those times. I wasn't on a CGM for a few months after my diagnosis, but having to finger prick before and after meals and before bed and waking up, and it's like, holy cow, so much of my life is changing. Just the daily routines. But ultimately, I look at all of it now, and of course, looking back, it's like, okay, that's a great story. It's even kind of funny at some parts. But I hope, there's so many details that I probably can't even get them all in a video. But if you do have questions, please leave them in the comments, or message me. I would be happy to answer any and all of them. And I hope that my story brings some level of comfort. That's the reason I share it. And if you are going through this, stay strong. I know you can figure it out. I promise that you can do it. Even if it's just taking it one day at a time. So grateful for diabetes. it's changed my life in more ways than I thought. And to say that I'm grateful for it is crazy. But I do think it's made me stronger and healthier in a weird way. So thank you everyone for watching, and keep going one by one.